Our sermon text today is the gospel lesson for today. Have you ever been overseas and seen how people treat strangers? Have you ever gone to a new community and felt isolated because people were standoffish, wouldn't talk to you, wouldn't greet you, wouldn't be nice to you? I went to a church once, and I walked into the church. I was wearing a leather jacket with fringe on it and a hat, and this guy goes, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I come to worship." And he says, "Well, worship's not for another hour and a half." I said, "Okay." So I got in my car. I drove to the local diner and had a little bit of breakfast. Then I came back. About a half an hour or so later, church was open. I went in. I took my hat off, my coat, and I had my clerical on under it. And I put the robe on, and I came to lead service. And I led the church service, and the guy greeted me on the way out. "Oh, we're glad to see you, Pastor," and stuff like this. He says, "There was this guy who came earlier." And he started to tell me about it. I said, "Well, why weren't you kind to him? Why didn't you offer him a cup of coffee or ask him to sit down?" He says, "Well, I didn't know what he was or who he was or what he was doing. I said, "Well, it happened to be me." We treat people based on what's going on in our head and our hearts, not necessarily the way they deserve, the way we imagine they deserve. And the way we treat people indicates where we are at. I tend to, when I'm at restaurants, not be very polite. Not that I'm rude, I'm just to the point. I leave off the word please and forget. And my family's constantly pointing that out to me. And as I thought about that, I thought, where is my heart at? And what it is when I go to a restaurant, I figure I'm paying for it, and it should be good service. I just expect certain things. I'm focused on me, not the surroundings, not the people, not the workers. There's a balance that we have to get. And that's the struggle. And in this text, it says, "You've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." Now, Leviticus 24 says, "If anyone injures your neighbor as he has done, it shall be done to him. Fracture for a fracture, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Whatever injury he has given to a person shall be given to him." Now, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verses 16 through 21 kind of puts this in a different context. It says, "If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties in the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priest, and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness, and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. You shall hear and fear, the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not have pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot." Now the teachers of the law, the scribes, the Pharisees, taught justice without mercy, self-protection of the community without care and concern for people. And what they did was they took Leviticus, where when someone hurts someone, you don't get revenge too far. It's an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You ever stand in line at school? Remember when we used to stand in the cafeteria lines and somebody would bump you and they'd turn around and you'd threaten them to death? You'd scare them and say, "Don't you dare do that again, or I'll beat you up," type of stuff. And the idea was, if I come on real harsh and strong, they will never do anything to me again. I saw how people who live in large groups with a lot of people and very little space tend to live with that attitude. Very thin-skinned, ready to jump and fight at a notice. And I've heard parents teach their children, well, if anybody does anything to you, just slap them down. Just let them know who's boss. That's a way of protecting themselves. That's how the world thinks. We must protect ourselves from danger. And so we must have strength and portray strength and even overwhelm those around us. To prevent that, Leviticus says, no, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Whatever injury has been given to the person, it shall be given to him. In other words, let the crime and the punishment fit. It used to be that no matter what you did, you were killed. You go to some countries, you steal, they cut your hand off, right? You go to other countries, they kill you. I remember in the service, I went to the Philippines during martial law. A little boy stole, and the policeman shot him. That was the martial law. Mankind thinks power and control is the answer. The Bible said, no, let's have justice. Then Deuteronomy went on and says, now you need to purify yourself as a group of people, and you need to keep yourself pure. And you need to deal with evil without pity so that others will understand they can't live that way. But still, it was a sense of justice. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand. But give the justice no matter what the situation. That's the way the scribes and Pharisees taught. We must protect ourselves from the evil of the Romans and pagans and others. So we must purify ourselves. And when anyone is caught doing wrong, justice must prevail. No mercy. But Jesus said, but I say unto you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, then go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. That sounds like extremes. What Jesus is really talking about is how are you going to treat people? If someone slaps you on the cheek, do you immediately jump back with revenge and justice and lay into them? Or can you turn the other cheek and not demand that justice? When I taught in high school, I had to teach the older boys. I said, especially those who came from the inner city, just because someone hits you does not mean you have to hit them back. And they go, are you crazy? I said, no. I said, I have enough power in myself to know when I'm really in danger. And there'll be people who get mad at me and slap me or hit me, but they haven't really hurt me all that much, and they haven't really done too much to me, and they're not about to do it again, seeing how big I am and how angry I might get, you know? I said, there's a sense of self-power, self-protection. So I don't always have to jump back and just lay them out. And they would look at me like, no, no, no. If you don't do that, they'll think you're a wimp. They'll think you're crazy. And they'll go after you. They'll be bullying you from then on. Jesus says you don't have to. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak. In other words, don't make the issue about what you have. Make the issue about what's going on in the relationship. If anyone forced you to go 1 mile, see, at that time the Roman soldiers had heavy packs, and they could grab anybody in the territory and say, carry my pack for 1 mile. And you had to do it, or you were against the Romans executed. So he says, go 2 miles for them. Doesn't make sense. I've heard people take these verses and teach them in such a way as Jesus is saying, never defend yourself. Someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other means, see this cheek? See the other one? Hit it too. You know, throw your cloak at the man who wants your coat. In other words, you want that? Okay, we'll take this too. You know? The struggle is people like to teach. This means give and be kind with no boundaries. If we were to take that meaning, we'd finally have to surrender everything we have. Our home, our house, our wife, our children. You know, some people say if someone begs to you, give to them. Automatically, just give to them. I remember being, as a young pastor, having people call me up and say, Pastor, I need money for gas or something like that. And I'd give it to them. And one time, an older pastor said, well, I don't give them the money because they might misuse it, but I buy them the gas. So I said, that makes sense. So I kind of took that practice on. And I've had many people ask me for gas and say, well, okay, I'll meet you at the gas station and never show up. All they wanted was the money. And we know people do those things. When people, I had a lady come into church once, ask for money, and I didn't have any. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't have any. And she cussed me out, chewed me up and down, said, what type of Christian are you? Not giving any money, you so selfish, and walked out. And I thought, how should I respond to that? So I sat down and prayed for her. Said, Lord, I don't know what to do. So I just prayed. The meaning of this text is not to have no boundaries. Jesus is teaching us that we must suffer all things from everyone without defending ourselves. Think about that for a minute. If that's what he's teaching, that we have no right to plead a case or to lodge a complaint with the court or to claim or demand what belongs to us? If all these things are forbidden, then personal safety, private property would be impossible. And finally, the social order of our lives would collapse. To answer what Jesus understands by this text, we must pay attention to the main point of the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew 5:20. I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So we must go beyond what in righteousness what the scribes and Pharisees teach. They taught justice without mercy. Jesus is saying we should not desire revenge. We should have an attitude of restraining our vindictiveness. When someone hurts us, we should have enough self-control not to automatically jump back and hit, but to think what's appropriate for the situation, what's needed. When we have restraint, we need to have restraint not just physically, not just with our tongues, but with our very heart, with our very thoughts. How do we see people? Are people something I need to be protected from? Something I need to control? Something I can't trust? People out to use me? How do I view them? See, Jesus wants our hearts that are neither impatient, nor wreak vengeance, nor disturb peace. Jesus is teaching us to have a kind and merciful heart that does not force justice with an attitude of vengeance, but uses justice to protect and save people. When we use justice to protect and save people, yes, you may call the police on someone to get that criminal off the street to protect other people. It's not vengeance, it's to protect the community. You may stand up in court and defend yourself and demand right to protect that businessman who's trying to cheat you from cheating others. In other words, the idea of living with people and justice is to use it for the good of the community as well as yourself. It's not just what you can get. Now that's foreign to this world. You've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now the text says, as we read, you shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest he incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That's the passage we read in the Old Testament, and that's the concept. Okay, love our neighbor. The Pharisees, the corrupt teachers, they added in, and hate your enemy. As if this was legitimate inference from Leviticus. They say, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. And that's the way the world works. Most of the world works that way. You're my neighbor. You're my family. I love you. You're not my family. I don't. You're my friends. You're not my friends. You're part of my church. You're not part of my church. You're part of my religion. You're not part of my religion. Jesus says, don't live like the world. Think about it. If you do that, if you love those who love you, what reward is that? I mean, you're doing just what the world does. We're to be greater than the world in our godliness and our holiness. Even the tax collectors do that. You know, the ones who are corrupt and cheat. If you only greet your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Even the Gentiles, the unbelievers do that. No, Jesus is saying, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For why? Why should we care for those who aren't so good? Because God himself lets the sun rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the just and the unjust. In other words, to bless all people, if he was to punish only the sinners, only bless the good, none of us would be blessed. If God was only to bless the just, who's really just? Who's really good? Only by God's grace do we not do some evils. No, God lets the rain and the sun shine on both so that the world can survive. It goes back to the tares and the wheat, the wicked and the good in the same field. Should we pull them out? Should we get rid of all the sinners immediately? No, don't do that unless you pull some of the wheat with it. At the end times, I'll separate all that out. I'll deal with that. So there's a certain sense in which we live with people to bless them, even if they do not deserve it. We certainly love all people, not just some people. I was amazed at the prejudiceness that I experienced in New York. And you know what? It was not white-black prejudiceness. It was Irish-Italian. It was German-Polack. It was Mexican-American. In other words, everybody broke themselves up by their ethnic groups and fought with each other. And I thought, wow, how sad. God does not want us to do that. He does not want us to love only those that love us. God wants us to truly care for all people, to pray for them, especially those who use you. Pray for them. Now, our righteousness must exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, or you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. We are to live toward others with lives that express these qualities of love: patience, kindness, a goodness about us, a gentleness and self-control within us for them. Then you will not seek vengeance, nor will you only love those who love you. Life will no longer be lived in terms as what's in it for you and how much you protect you, but rather you will be asking yourself what's the right thing to do and the godly thing to do. And then he ends with verse 48. You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. The standards of God are greater than the rules we make in our churches and our groups. The standards of God are more than just the Ten Commandments. The standards of God is a perfect heart, a holy heart, a righteous heart. If you want to think of yourself as special and good because of your behaviors and your actions, then be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Or beg for mercy from Jesus and rest in his mercy, his forgiveness, his death on the cross. And say, God, help me be better than I am today. Help me be more loving, more kind, more caring, more proper in justice and care for others. Amen.